Okay, so we're now recording. So, as I say, my name's Andrew Newman. I'm one of the research and policy managers here at SQA. I've been at SQA since January this year, working on grading in the NextGen HN pilot. I'm going to talk about all of that in a fair bit more detail as we go. Before that, I had a background in vocational education in England, worked at City and Guilds and NCFE for the best part of 20 years. So it's been really interesting to come up to Scotland and look at how Scotland does vocational qualifications and grading. My aim today is to really be quite open about the work we're doing on the NextGen High National Qualifications, share some of the information and sort of direction of travel of what we're doing in terms of grading those qualifications. But I am also aware that we might have a bit of a mixed audience. So I'm going to give a little bit of a potted history of the NextGen HNs, including a bit of kind of back to basics context around grading. I'm going to update on where we're at with grading in our current NextGen HN pilot, just to give a bit of an update on progress, what stage we're at and what we're expecting to do over the next year or so. Also going to give a sort of direction of travel, a bit of direction of travel information in terms of what we're expecting, where we're expecting to be when we complete the project. Again, in the spirit of transparency, some of these things may change as we go through the pilot, but we're hoping that will be a useful thing to do. And then finally, a bit of time for Q&A, and I'm also planning to see if there is anyone else on the call today who would like to be involved in supporting some of the work we're doing with NextGen HNs in nothing more than a sort of contributing to validation capacity, but that's something I'm keen to ask at the end. Okay, so NextGen HNs, high nationals and grading, how have we got here? So the NextGen HNs are new versions of the HNC and HND qualifications. A review of these qualifications was initiated back in 2018. Qualifications had been around since the early aughts, so early 2000s. So again, best part of 20 years, and it was felt that it was time to have a bit of a review of those qualifications, and a process was launched to consider how best to reshape those qualifications and make them ready for the future and ensure that they fulfill their purpose in an up-to-date way. So some of the things that were driving those changes, I don't think these will be unfamiliar to anyone, and they don't just apply to qualifications, but qualifications have to update and take these things into account. So industrial, societal change, digital industrial revolution, especially things around changing demands for learners and what they might do in their future life, multiple jobs, not staying in one job for your whole life, training for jobs that don't exist right now, and in particular things like the capacity to apply skills beyond a single qualification or a career, as well as things like mental health and resilience. So all of these things were part of the mix in terms of looking at the new versions of the qualifications. And obviously today I'm talking about assessment and in particular grading. So some of those early engagement findings around assessment and grading suggested that centres delivering the current qualifications, SQA staff working on those qualifications, students on those qualifications, felt they had a heavy assessment load and that some of the assessment had a repetitious nature. It wasn't as highly relevant and valid to the qualifications as they felt it could be. It was also felt that differentiation of candidate performance was absolutely key. Obviously, that's part of the purpose of grading, but perhaps it was felt that that wasn't happening in the best possible way for these qualifications at the time. So an initial position was reached in terms of developing new qualifications. Different options were considered, reasons, backgrounds, and the challenges around differentiation and grading. Views were taken from students, staff, various sectors in terms of considering different options. And it was found that differentiation in some form was preferred for a variety of reasons. People talked about the motivation of students, the reward of students, progression into university, employer demand, identification of high-performing candidates. So there was a clear preference for the full qualification to be graded, i.e. that a student's grade would take into account all of the components and content within the qualification. So this led to a next generation of higher national qualifications, and this is what we mean when we talk about the NextGen HNs. The first thing to say for these qualifications is that the purpose of the qualifications has remained the same. So the level and purpose, the progression into work or articulation into HE, these are still the primary aims of these qualifications. That has not changed. Some things have changed. So the HNCs and Ds are in their next gen form are now designed to be individual qualifications. Previously, a student could complete an HND that included the content of the HNC. Now you do one qualification and then move on to do the next qualification. They comprise of 120 SCQF credit points at level 7 and level 8, so level 7 HNC, level 8 HND. The aim in the new qualifications was to have larger and fewer units, and that was really trying to address some of that challenge around the repetitious nature of the assessment. In addition, talking about kind of future-proofing, taking into account some of those challenges around the new world of work, resilience and mental health challenges, incorporation of meta skills and learning for sustainability has been put into the qualifications. So the qualifications now include content on learning for sustainability and meta skills. And the qualifications now have new grading models. They no longer have a single, or in some cases, 2 graded units. They now have a form of whole qualification grading, which I'm going to speak about in a bit more detail. They also have a new and supportive approach to external quality assurance. It's very much recognised that with new qualifications and centres getting to grips with those qualifications, you do need to support centres to deliver those qualifications in the appropriate way. So there's more interaction and more support in terms of the external quality assurance. And they're also digital by design. So technology is used, for example, in the sharing of learning materials. I just want to focus on the grading models a little bit, and I'll start with a little bit of a broader discussion around grading. So we want to ask ourselves, why do we grade qualifications? It might seem a simple question, but I think it's worthwhile when you're thinking about a new approach to grading for a new set of qualifications. So generally speaking, we would grade a qualification as a measure of a learner's achievement against a set of the content in that qualification. But grades can have other purposes. So for example, a grade in a qualification can be an indicator of future performance. HEIs, higher education institutes, universities and so on might use that as an indication of whether a student's going to be able to perform on a course and decide entrance requirements. They can also be a form of feedback. So they give an indication to a learner as to how well they're doing on that course. And that can also be motivational and drive good achievement in terms of both the learning and the teaching. And I think where a grade can meaningfully reflect the whole qualification's purpose and do that in a valid way that is seen to be valid by the people who make use of that qualification, then you really do drive the kind of learner and teacher motivation through the validity of that grading approach. We can also, in broad terms, draw a distinction between academic and vocational qualifications. Now, this is broad terms. There's an awful lot of nuance around this. I don't mean to say that it's as black and white as this, but you know, certain types of qualifications might grade in certain ways. So, for example, academic type qualifications, think about things like Nat5s and Highs in Scotland, might typically use letter grades A, B, C versus the types of descriptive grades you might often find in vocational qualifications. By descriptive grades, I mean things like pass, merit, and distinction. So academic qualifications, generally speaking, are measuring on a relative scale, whereas a vocational qualification is measuring against set criteria because it's related to, you know, a particular job or occupation. And if it has something like a pass grade, that pass grade has a meaning in the sense that a student has met all of the requirements for that qualification in a way that the industry recognise. Academic qualifications, generally speaking, you're looking at whether a learner is in a higher group. Are they going to be able to progress onto the next stage? Will they be able to perform in further qualifications? Whereas for vocational qualifications, it's have you met a standard based on the actual job or occupational area or the set of content. So I would say that's quite a big challenge for the higher national qualifications because they have a dual purpose. They're trying to do both. Learners coming onto the higher national qualifications might be looking to progress into the workplace once they finish their qualification, or they might be keen to articulate onto HEI courses. And the grading approach needs to accommodate both of those things, which is quite a challenge for this type of qualification. So this is where we're at with the grades in the NextGen higher national qualifications. So they're on a 3-point scale with achieved and then achieved with merit and achieved with distinction sitting above. And these are descriptive grades. So the achieved grade means that a learner has achieved the standard required for that qualification. Achieved with merit, achieved with distinction means they've done that and some more, either to a degree that's worthy of merit or to a degree that's worthy of distinction. So these grades will be the same in terms of the title as whether they are HNC or HND, but we're currently looking at the descriptors for these grades to make sure that they best reflect what these grades mean. And that's something that we're working on as part of the pilot because we think our descriptors can be improved, and we'll probably have different descriptors depending on whether it's an HNC or an HND qualification. In addition, those grades would appear on the certificate, not only with the grade outcome, but the grade outcome descriptor would appear there as well. And that gives, that's there for the purposes of transparency and for end users of the qualifications, but it makes it really important that that descriptor is reflective of what the achievement within that qualification actually means and is written in a way that the users of the qualification understand, not just learners, their parents, teachers, but also universities, for example, or employers who might be looking at that certificate. So to summarize where we're at in terms of our current HNCs and HNDs and our NextGen HNCs and HNDs, our current HNCs, HNDs will typically have one graded unit. Some of them have 2 graded units. Our NextGen HNCs and HNDs will have full qualification grading. So either the majority or in many cases all of the content will contribute towards the learner's final grade. The current HNCs have a grade scale of A, B, C. So that graded unit will be achieved at an A, a B, or a C, and that is the final achievement. In the NextGen version of the HNCs and HNDs, a learner can achieve either an achieved with merit, or an achieved with distinction grade. The current qualifications don't have meta skills or learning for sustainability. The new qualifications do, so they will include content on meta skills and learning for sustainability. And that content will be part of the grading picture as well. The meta skills directly and learning for sustainability is still to be confirmed as part of the pilot. In terms of assessment, both the current HNCs and the NextGen HNCs are internally assessed. So we rely on centres to set and deliver the assessment for the qualification, with SQA taking on the role of externally quality assuring that delivery. And that really does allow a lot of flexibility in terms of how centres do that delivery, but it also means it's important to have a standardisation step in place. And finally, the purpose has not changed. Of course, that's reflected in the title. They may be NextGen, but they are still HNCs and HNDs, and they have the same purpose of preparing learners for a particular occupational area, either through a route into HEI and then on into a career, or directly into a job. Okay, I'll talk a little bit about the piloting of these qualifications with respect to the grading approach now. So in terms of the pilot, I think it's worth emphasizing the purpose of the pilot is as a genuine pilot, i.e. that we're not expecting that the qualifications will be 100% correct when we pilot them. We think we need to pilot the qualifications to come to good evidence-based conclusions about how they should work and whether our hypotheses for how the grading should work are correct, for example. And where we need to make changes and improve and validate the approach, then that's what that's what we will do, but it allows us to test our models. So we're currently in piloting stage at the moment. This is intended to be a highly collaborative approach, and it absolutely has been with the pilot centres who are involved with the qualifications, certainly in my experience. We're looking at a service design-led and collaborative activity. So we're designing the qualifications to meet the needs of centres who will actually deliver the qualifications. That's being done through the creation of qualification design teams within SQA. We have an external reference steering group that helps us in terms of the direction we're taking and keeps us in line in terms of keeping to the purpose of the qualifications. And involved in that approach in various different ways are centres, learners, FE, industry employers and training providers, higher education, HEIs, professional associations and regulatory bodies, and other appointees, other stakeholders that are involved in the qualifications. Obviously, that's a key part of the piloting and a key part of testing the approach. And as I said, one of the things I'll come back to at the end is that whether there are any, in particular, employers or HEIs on this call who might want to get a little bit more involved in the approach and get hold of a little bit more information. It's a list of our pilot centres who either have been delivering qualifications in 2022-23 or who will be delivering qualifications through 2023-2024, so currently delivering qualifications. And just to give a sense of the breadth of the qualifications that are being worked on, this is a list of all of the HNCs and HND qualifications that are currently being delivered. So really quite a large suite of qualifications being piloted with a view to eventually replacing current HNCs, HNDs with these new versions over the next few years. And this is just to give a sense of the timescales for the delivery of these qualifications. So there was an opportunity before I was at SQA to pilot the HNC television qualification back in academic year 21-22. So that completed grading. And then a vast bulk of the pilot came online in 2022-2023. And obviously we're now at the start of 23-24 with another round of qualifications being delivered. In each case where a qualification is already being delivered, it's moved on to its next year. So HNC television is now in its third year of delivery, but it's only one qualification and we can't draw conclusions for the whole suite just from that one qualification. However, what we have been able to do is to come to some quite, confident conclusions, I would say, from the round of delivery that took place in 2022-2023. Now, with respect to grading, sometimes that's challenging because the grading doesn't take place, at least in terms of final grading, until the end of the qualification. So until sort of late spring, early summer. So that has happened for those qualifications listed under 2022-2023. We've learned a lot from that process, working with our pilot centres. There's more digging to do in terms of how they've gone through that process, what's worked well and what needs to be improved. But that has allowed us to draw some conclusions, which we're now testing through this next year of pilot delivery. So what are we actually testing? Well, in broad terms, we're testing the grading approach, but we actually have three different grading models that are being tested. So there's a key competency model, a holistic model, and a key component model. And I'll briefly run through what these look like. As much as anything else, I think this is worthwhile to look at the kind of common features of these models and pull out the things that are becoming a known common feature of these qualifications going forward. So I'll talk about each model with respect to the content, the units within the qualification, the assessment evidence, so how we expect centres to actually produce assessment for that qualification in the grading model, the judgment of the assessment, so how we expect centres to make a judgment of the quality of the assessment to decide on a final grade, and how that final overall grade judgment is made. So with respect to the content, this is common across the three models. So for key competency, for holistic, and for key component, each of those qualifications will have units which have evidence requirements. And that reflects the current version of the qualifications. And what it means is that even though we are making an overall judgment about the learner's grade in respect of whether they're an achieved with merit or an achieved with distinction, the qualifications still have units with very clear evidence requirements, all of which have to be achieved for a learner to be an achieved grade. So I think that brings a bit of rigor to the qualifications that may not always have been there before. There may have been circumstances where a learner could do particularly well in a graded unit, but may not have done so well across other aspects of the course. No fault of the learner, that's how the qualification was designed, but that might not always have been the truest reflection of the learner's ability against that content. Now learners will need to achieve across the units of the qualification to be an achieved before they're considered whether they're a merit or a distinction. In terms of assessment evidence, each of the qualifications takes a similar approach, and really it's a guidance for centres in terms of how they do that assessment. So for the key competency model, the suggestion is to use projects with self-reflective activities. For the holistic model, the expectation is a portfolio is produced, but that would contain a range of evidence. So for example, projects, tests, self-reflective activities. And for the key component model, the expectation is a portfolio and a project are both produced. Now, sitting within that is the control that the centre has on what those assessments should be. So a project can take a really wide range of different forms. And the advantage of that is that centres can produce assessments that they feel are truly valid to the content that they are assessing. So for example, if they are delivering an HNC television course, you would expect learners to be doing short television projects, being behind the camera, being script writing, being editing. And that can be part of their assessment. Of course, that will look very different if a learner is on a course in, say, accounting. So the assessments will look different, but they will still fit within that model. In terms of the judgment of the assessment, in each case, we're asking centres to use grading matrices. And I'll talk a little bit more in detail about those because I think it's useful to give an example on the next slide. Essentially, they are sets of criteria with guidance around how to make a judgment on the learner's achievement. And then in terms of the final overall grade judgment for the key competency model and the holistic model, we expect the centre to simply make an overall decision based on the guidance we give them and the assessment that the student has produced. In the case of the key component model, the two components, the portfolio and the project, are aggregated together based on rules, so essentially a mathematical approach. But just coming back to the grading matrices, this is an example of a grading matrix for a particular qualification. I'm not expecting to go through all of the detail of this grading matrix, but it felt worth sharing it to show how this might work and how it currently is working in the pilots. So what you'll see here is the very first page of a grading matrix. And this grading matrix might be 10, 12 pages long. You can see numbers down the left-hand column, and this is just listing the first two criteria against which a learner would be judged. So the first one happens to be personal values and principles. The second happens to be knowledge. Now, obviously, in each case, that is personal values and principles within the context of this particular qualification, which happens to be a chartered practice qualification. Similarly, with knowledge, that's knowledge in the case of this particular qualification. So how does a centre make a judgment about a learner's achievement against those? Well, we have written descriptors that are designed to support them to make that judgment. So across the top, you'll see it says achieved, achieved with merit, and achieved with distinction. And the centre's role is to look at the learner's evidence and decide whether the learner has met the standard of achieved or achieved with merit and achieved with distinction. To support this, we have guidance which points the centre towards the type of evidence they should expect and what it should look like. And that guidance can also point the centre towards particular bits of the unit, so particular bits of content that the centre should be thinking about when they're making that judgment. And that's where some of the consistency should come from in terms of centres making these judgments. Once a centre has gone through all of these criteria, they have to make a best fit judgment on the learner's grade. So, for example, if a learner is in all or almost all of the achieved standard for each of the criteria, then you can reasonably say that learner is an achieved. If they were in all or almost all of the merit, then you could reasonably say they were a merit. But where there is a mixture and they have something of a spiky profile, so for example, they're half achieved and half merit, then a judgment has to be made. And we aim to put guidance in to support that type of judgment, because if a learner is truly a mix, then they are a mix and there's no way around it. You do have to make a decision one way or another. So just to come back to the grading models, what they have in common, they all have units. All of the qualifications have units which have detailed evidence requirements, and those evidence requirements have to be achieved in a pass-fail sense before grading can take place. So there's that rigor sitting behind the qualifications. Each of the models is a version of whole qualification grading. So in each case, we're asking centres to make judgments about the learner's achievement across the whole of the qualification content. Each of the models is internally assessed, even where we specify things like portfolios or projects. We're asking centres to devise these and to assess them. And that should give centres a lot of flexibility in terms of what they can look like, and give them the flexibility to ensure that those assessments are highly valid to the content. And that's really about leveraging the centre's expertise in terms of the content they're teaching and delivering. And for each of the models, we produce grading matrices to support centres to make those judgments. And we have external quality assurance to check that they're making those judgments in an appropriate way, that they're not too strict and that they're not too lenient. So in terms of progress on the pilot, 13 pilot qualifications in total have now graded students. And I think we can talk about some themes that are emerging. So, for example, pilot centres are keen on more support and guidance on making those grading judgments. So that's something that we've worked on for this next pilot year. How do you use those grading matrices? How do you have confidence in the judgments that you're making? It's clear that standardization is important. Centres can see this themselves. They have a desire to ensure that where they're making judgments, they're not making judgments that are unfair to their learners or unfair to other learners in another centre. They want to be not too strict and not too lenient. And we have a process coming into place for that as well. There's a real desire for clarity on what the grades mean. So I think we've achieved it's fairly clear in terms of the evidence requirements across the units. But what does merit and what does distinction mean? And that's something we want to work on in terms of those descriptors. There's also been an incredibly positive response to the flexibility of the approach. The time that we've been able to spend with pilot centres has shown that they, well, really enjoy delivering these qualifications because they have more control over that approach. And they're working with learners who understand that everything they're doing on that course throughout the year will contribute towards their final grade. And I think that's made a big difference in some cases. So a really positive response from tutors and learners. We have carried out, or are in the process of carrying out, detailed grading reviews on all of the qualifications that have gone through grading. Now, I mentioned the HNC TV qualification, which had graded in the first year of the pilot. That grading review is complete and is up on our website. And I think it's really worth reading for anyone with an interest in grading in these NextGen HNCs. It's a qualitative, not quantitative piece of evidence. It describes how the two pilot centres delivering that qualification went about the qualification. It talks about their experiences in terms of what they found challenging, how they had to approach it, and the successes they got. It's quite detailed. It took quite a bit of time. Both centres were present for a discussion for a full day to talk about how they've gone that process. So it was really useful. And if you do have an interest in that, I really would recommend reading that review. There are more of those reviews to come, and the experience of our pilot centres, for me, is the primary source of evidence in terms of whether the grading approach is working in practice. Some more general findings. There's been clear engagement and positivity with the new approach. I think people can see that it refreshes the qualification, and whole qualification grading is, in general terms, and if done well, a positive thing. Meta skills have become a feature of assessment and have clearly been useful in almost all cases. They've not been as successful across the board as you know, in every case, but in almost all cases, they've been really useful. They have been a core part of the qualification and have allowed the teaching and delivery to sort of highlight some of those key skills that learners should understand and have a feel for if they're going to go out into the wider world of work. Learners have been more engaged on the qualification, the understanding around the fact that everything they're doing is contributing towards the grading has made a big difference. Centres want more exemplification. They want to be reassured that they're assessing appropriately and that they are measuring the standard correctly, which I think is understandable and certainly something we want to do something about. We've also been talking to HEIs, and I thought it was worth sharing some initial views from our HEIs. So they have liked the rigor behind the grading models. When they see the grading models in detail, that's helped give confidence in terms of the qualifications. They also have been positive about the whole qualification grading approach versus simple graded units. There's a perception that that's more reliable. They have raised challenges. So there are challenges of managing across two systems. So admission staff seeing both ABCs and achieved with merit and achieved with distinction during the period of the pilot. Well, obviously that won't always be the case, but for the moment it is, as we do have a mix of pilot centres delivering the new qualifications and other centres delivering the current qualifications. They wanted to understand the purpose of the new grade outcomes when they're currently working with ABC and those ABCs are well understood. And I hope that presentations like this are starting to expand on what that purpose is and why there are new grade outcomes. They're very keen, of course, as HEIs to ensure that academic skills are properly reflected in the grade outcomes. We believe they are, but we want to make sure that's messaged really clearly. They want to see some controls around the subjectivity of grade outcome descriptors. You know, how do we control that? Centres are making judgments. How is that standardized? They also recognise that the achieved grade in these qualifications will be a high bar, and that the distinction, the merit and the distinction are a step above that. So I think that's something to be aware of. So that's where we're at with the pilot. And then finally, what I'll do before we move into a little bit of an opportunity for discussion and Q&A is just share a little bit of direction of travel, where we think things are going over the next few months. So the different grading models that we've used in the pilot have worked well for different qualifications. They have been adapted to fit things like accounting or social sciences, TV or computing. But obviously the content within those qualifications is quite different. And it's clear that no one model can be imposed across such a wide range of different qualifications in terms of their content and have a valid effect. So what we will look at is, rather than having a particular model being imposed, there will be a set of grading principles that must apply for any HNC or HND that's in the NextGen form. So for example, that there will be a grading matrix with well thought out criteria, that there'll be a standardization process that sits behind that there'll be the inclusion of meta skills in grading, so on and so forth. But the form that will take within the qualification will be down to the content of that qualification itself, and therefore more valid. It's really, really clear that the quality assurance, which is already very robust and in place, but also the standardization on top of that is vital for these qualifications. The grades will not have meaning without that, so the grading approach won't work without it. And we're building a process to support this. To speak about that briefly from a sort of centres point of view, what we're looking at is something that will allow centres to get together on a yearly basis, discuss their assessment and grading decisions in the company of SQA, in the company of EQAs for that qualification, and have a way to feed that back into the next year's delivery. So, for example, adding guidance to grading matrices, producing exemplar materials, building a community that can then support each other in terms of how those grade decisions are made across the different centres delivering the qualification. I don't think there's anything new to that in terms of delivery of these types of qualifications, but it's something that's happened less with the current version and needs to be formalised for the new versions. We will be doing more grading reviews and more engagement with pilot centres. As I say, the experience of the pilot centres is a really important evidence base for what the final grading principles will look like. We really want to do more engagement with employers and HEIs, especially around the overall grade descriptors. We don't think they are good enough at the moment to describe what the overall grade means, and we want to work with representative employers and HEIs to make sure we can improve those grade descriptors. Finally, I mentioned at the start, I work in the research and policy team at SQA. So this is a key part of what SQA does, and there will be research that is objective desk-based research along the lines of what do other nations do, not just in the UK, but in other countries. How do they approach grading like this? And that's not to say that we should do the same thing as other nations, but it's to say we have an awareness of what's going on, and if we've decided to do something different, we have a good rationale for why. Finally, in terms of timescales, those grading principles, those new grade descriptors, the guidance and templates and documentation in their final form, we're looking to have complete by summer 2024, so summer next year. So that will be the kind of completion of the initial stage. The pilot will carry on for a little bit longer. The qualifications will go through validation approach to a timescale before they're rolled out, but that is our current direction of travel. Okay, I'm going to stop there and stop the recording.